venture, but a venture with an upside. And the status quo is really a road to nowhere. It's a dead-end street. Now, when I say that scholars should embrace the critical juncture, that doesn't mean they should emulate what I do or what Mark does, and do a lot of public outreach, do a lot of public speaking, go to Washington, lobby for this or that. They can do exactly what they're doing still. They just should recognize the moment we're in. That should be reflected in their teaching, to understand that the extraordinarily unique times we're in, where the sort of policies we're going to make for the next 3 to 5 years, specifically around the internet, but not exclusively, will go a long way towards what path we put it on for a couple generations. And once you're on that path, it's really hard to get off it. So we have a moment now that we can really affect change. And whatever your political viewpoints, this is an important point. This isn't just an interesting, you let your friends on who you agree with. Everyone should participate in this. Because again, in a critical juncture, there is no status quo. There's no there. It's going to change. The question is how it's going to change. And if we don't participate, I'll tell you who's going to make the decisions for us. AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, and General Electric. They've all got thousands of lobbyists combined in Washington, eager to make these decisions without anyone bugging them, like us. To give some sense of how big these lobbies are, AT&T, who Free Press does battle with so much, I feel like, I should be a shareholder. I get honorary stock for battle scars. AT&T convened a meeting of all its lobbyists in Washington in January of this year. And they have a single lobbyist at least for every single member of Congress on Capitol Hill, professional lobbyists. And these are 6-figure people usually. The top ones are 7-figure. They couldn't find a room in Washington big enough to hold their entire Capitol Hill lobbying for. They literally couldn't find a room. So they had a room with like a couple smaller rooms off to it with like closed circuit TV. That's how many lobbyists one company we're fighting has. Why do they have that many lobbyists? Because think how much those monopoly contracts are worth. If you're willing to spend $180 million a year on lobbying, what do you think the value of owning the internet is to these people? They've done the math. If they can privatize the internet, it's well worth $180 million as chicken feed today if you own the internet for the next generation or two. Verizon feels the same way, so does Comcast. It's a handful of companies that dominate cable and telephone service in this country. So this issue is exploding. I've just mentioned one of them. The issue that really took off, that surprised everyone, was the media ownership fight of 2003, when nearly 3 million Americans protested the efforts of the Federal Communications Commission to relax media ownership rules for big companies. And again, this was not an issue of government regulation of free markets. This was actually government allocation of government monopoly licenses. How many government monopoly licenses could a single company have? How many radio and TV stations? And with the super profits those monopoly licenses give you, how much other media could you buy with them? So this is purely a public issue. This is not an intervention into public property, into private enterprise. There is no private enterprise. The most important competitive advantage of a commercial broadcaster or cable company or telephone company, where they're most important that they compete, is not with consumers. My God, cable companies and telephone companies have the worst consumer ratings in the world. It's with politicians. That's where they have a comparative advantage, with lobbying, with buying off politicians at the state and federal level. That's what we're going up against. And in 2003, it looked hopeless. I mean, people thought there's no chance you're going to stop the Republican majority in the FCC. The Republicans controlled the House and Senate after the 2002 elections. Bush was totally on board with getting rid of all media ownership rules, letting a single company own all the media basically in a town with very few limits. And really, it's one of those wonderful moments that makes you realize you should never, you should always keep an open mind. This sort of burst out. It's sort of like in the late 1980s, when I had a friend in 1986 whose family was leaving South Africa. They were South African, they were white, but they were very liberal. And in 1986, he said, "My family's finally leaving South Africa. After 200 years, we've given up. We can't stop apartheid here. It's hopeless. The racists are totally in control." That was in 1986. Well, 1990, Nelson Mandela is president of South Africa. And that's what I think of in 2003. The smart money, everyone, including myself, said, we can't win this fight. This is hopeless. In January 2003, well, in June 2004, the courts threw out the changes after Congress had voted several of them out. Basically said, you didn't listen to the American people when you tried to do this. You ignored the input that was organized, the people had on this. You broke the law that you were supposed to follow to implement these rules changes. And since then, the thing has just kept going on issue after issue. efforts to cut the funding to public broadcasting, which the Bush administration has tried every year until the 2006 elections. And people often say, well, I don't like PBS or NPR. You know, they're bad too. But that funding isn't just for PBS and NPR. That also goes to all the community stations. The Pacifica stations get as much money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting as do the NPR affiliates here in New York. And those would be the first stations that would be cut. We've been able to win now the creation of 1,000 new low-power, non-commercial FM radio stations around the country. That's a campaign that a group of us, not just Free Press, but the whole movement organized around. We've been able to stop, as much as we can now, the Bush administration's efforts to produce propaganda, pay off journalists, put a ringer in the press corps, a number of steps that show, I hope you're familiar with some of them, that show abject contempt for freedom of the press by the Bush administration. In my view, sufficient steps just there for impeachment, based on what I know of the Constitution of the United States. So that nowadays, I don't know what it takes to qualify for impeachment, Mark. Do you have to
sex with a goat?
No, I mean, you can shoot someone in the face, apparently. It doesn't even get, they might as well take it out of the Constitution. At any rate, on issue after issue, we've had a great deal of success. It's been really heartening, and our numbers have grown. Free Press, the group that Josh and I helped start, 5 years ago, Josh was like sleeping on the floor in the corner of an office in Massachusetts. We had no funding. Today we have 33 organizers, 500,000 members, 11-person staff in Washington. We're growing. There are other groups too that have grown. We're by far the largest. But it's been extraordinary, and I think we're poised now to move from playing strictly defense to playing offense. Not simply stopping the bad guys from doing more bad things, but going out and actually winning new things. And one other issue, it's the central issue of the next 2 years in many respects, I've alluded to it already, is network neutrality, which I trust you're all familiar with. This is a foundational issue, and why this is very simple. If we had competitive internet access for broadband in this country, so you had 10 choices or 12 choices, and someone else could start the 13th, this wouldn't be a big issue. Because then if someone tried to monkey with the internet, you could just go to a different system that let everyone through. But in the United States, thanks to the 1996 telecom law, most Americans, your choice is either the cable company or the phone company, and that's about it for broadband. And in 40% of the country, you only get one of those choices. And not only that, and this is a side issue, the quality of what's considered broadband delivered by both these services is well below what you find in Europe or Asia. That's another matter in terms of speed and quality. The cost, you'll be glad to know, is number one, though. We win that award. You pay the most for the least in America. At any rate, the cable and phone companies, they're sitting there saying, okay, well, because we paid off the politicians, have these monopoly licenses, and we've worked it, so we want to be able now to sort of regulate which websites can come through and which can't. Because Americans had this fictitious belief, I think most people did in the 1990s, that the internet was this magical technology that couldn't be regulated. It was like, it was like some genius, like Bill Gates must have figured it out, or Al Gore. And, it was impossible to regulate this technology, so no one could stop your dissident website from getting through. Well, you know what? It wasn't the technology that let all the websites go through. It was a policy. It was the common carriage policy that was won through hard struggle in the telecom law of 1934. And it was put in there basically because the deal that activists were able to get, they said, okay, AT&T, you can have a monopoly over telephone service in this country, but as part of the deal, you've got to let everyone who wants to use your service have equal access at the same price. You can't discriminate, say only you can use the phone, but you can't. That's called common carriage. Well, that principle also applied to the internet when the phone companies started doing dial-up. They couldn't discriminate against websites. Any website that wanted to come on, any ISP that wanted to come on had to be treated equally. And that's why crazy websites get on just as easily as Rupert Murdoch's website or Microsoft's website. It was a policy, not the technology, that created that. And the big cable and phone companies, and thanks to the 1996 Telecom Act, we went from about 13 or 14 down to about 3 or 4 now in the country, maybe 5. They're chafing at that. They're saying, why, if we can privatize the internet and basically say which websites come through quickly and which ones don't come through or come through very slowly, we can make a ton of money because people will pay us to be on the fast lane. And they want to do this not really for political reasons, it's primarily commercial. So if you want to buy a book or book a ticket or buy something online, you have to go through one of their websites that either they authorize or they get a cut of the action, the cable TV model. Because there's a lot of money there if they can do that. But they've shown already they're more than willing to use it for political reasons if need be, if they're pressured. And So this is now a huge fight to prevent them from effectively privatizing